Do you know if you are 18 to 29 and are a woman, you are twice as likely to be in a relationship as your male counterparts? And if you are an adult in this country, out of every 1,000, only 33 of them are going to be getting married in any given year.
Super interesting.
So why are the 18 to 29, the Gen Z generation, why are they not men? Why are they not getting into committed relationships?
I don't know, but let's get into that.
Let's do it.
Before we jump into today's episode, we just wanted to share a few things with you. First, we'd like you to like this episode and then subscribe to our podcast. If you're doing that on YouTube, also hit the bell notification so that you know when we post anything new. And then share this with somebody that you feel like this would be beneficial for.
That's right. If you would like to support our show further, we would welcome that. You are welcome to do that at anchor.fm/marriagebydesign to check out your options for supporting the program financially. Otherwise, guys, the links to our social media are always in the description of every video, so feel free to check those out there. And now, let's get to the show. Hi, everybody. I'm Nate Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock, and you have joined us for Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast. And this is a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say about marriage, how we live that out practically, and sometimes about maybe some current event things.
Right. So if you've listened to our channel for any time, and I apologize, channeling my inner Stranger Things, I'm totally a mouth breather today because it's like the entirety of my sinuses has completely stopped.
Yeah, I told him 2 days ago I can smell the sick on him.
Right.
He just smells sick.
That's just the leprosy.
Oh, okay.
But so apologies if you hear me mouth breathing into the microphone today. But if you've listened to our podcast for any amount of time, you know I'm a big history and political enthusiast. And a part of that in the ministry that the Lord's given us is keeping my sort of finger on the pulse of what is being said about marriage and marriage-related topics in the news around us. And so typically on Marriage Monday, we do one of three things. We're either taking a look at what the Bible says about marriage. That's been a big push in this season 3 of Marriage by Design. And so we've just been going through the passages of Scripture that talk about marriage. And we're going to be transitioning to a portion in 1 Corinthians 7 where Paul's addressing one of the two biblical allowances for divorce. And I say it that way specifically because it's not a biblical prescription for divorce. It's a biblical allowance for divorce. So we'll get to that in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. Or we're doing practical things. Practically, how do we live, God's design for marriage out in our lives? And the third thing that we do is take a look at what's being said in popular culture about marriage, family-related issues, dating, etc. And that is one of the things that I want to do today. So we're going to be using an article by Aldo Badazzoni, who was writing for Fox News in this particular article. And the title of the article is, "I am Gen Z. Men in my generation are not dating. Why should we?" And so that kind of caught my eye. And this has been something that I've seen a number of articles about in the last couple of weeks because a number of new Pew Research studies and Gallup polls and a number of these studies have been released dealing with particularly men's viewpoint towards dating. And the thing that all of these articles, now they approach the why in different ways, but all of these articles have reached the same conclusion. Men in the 18 to 29, what we would call Gen Z, the generation after the millennial generation, they have stopped dating. Now, that doesn't mean, that's a relative thing, right? As with any news article, there's some hyperbole involved. But in
Largely.
relative to previous generations, they've stopped dating. And the question is, why? And the article that Aldo puts together here, I thought hit on some really fascinating points that are worth us considering. And so what difference does this make to you as our audience? Well, a number of you, and we know because we hear from you, are champions for marriage, right? You're watching the Marriage by Design podcast because God has called you and your spouse to fight for marriage. And a big piece of fighting for marriage is knowing what lies is the devil using, what avenues is the devil using to undermine marriage in this country and around the world, but mainly in the United States. And I think this article points out some really serious flaws that we have allowed to really crack the foundation of dating in the United States. So let's just take a look through this. And some of it I'm just going to flat read, and I'll let you know I'll say quotation, when I'm reading. But here's how the article starts by Aldo Buttazzoni on FoxNews.com. Quote, all across America, marriage, sexuality, and relationships are on the steady decline among young people. According to a new Pew Research study, 63% of men aged 18 to 29 report being single. That means the number of single young men is nearly twice that of single young women, indicating a large breakdown in the social, romantic, and sexual lives of American men, end quote. So he's starting this article by just saying what we said in our open, that, men are 18 to 29, twice as likely to report being single. Now, it's easy to go, well, maybe it's taboo for a woman to say she's single even though she is, and so that explains some of the difference. And of course, there's statistical, as with any statistic, there are variances
Errors
between statistic and reality. But the point is, that's always been the case. So, you can't really discount a study like this because 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, those same pressures might have been in place.
Right. The study done.
Right. So he's going to start, So he's going to start asking why. And here's what he says, quote, one would think that making romantic connections would be easier than ever in our digital world, but the opposite is true. Our culture of convenience has paradoxically made dating more difficult for men as they're forced into a hyper-competitive, superficial environment that emphasizes instant gratification over true human connection. And then he's going to talk about the end quote, and then he's going to talk about these three issues that he thinks tie into why men aren't dating. And these are the things I want to offer up to you for your consideration. So here are the three things he talks about. 1, dating apps. 2, social media. And 3, pornography. So we're just going to talk through those in that order. And as he starts talking about dating apps or dating sites, here's what he's going to say. Quote, according to a survey of 6,034 adults, 53% of adults ages 18 to 29 have found someone to date through an app or a site. Well, I mean, at first blush, we would think that's positive, right? I mean, because these people that had trouble finding people are finding people.
Right. It seems like how are dating apps making people date less?
Right. And in fact, we know people who have found significant others and been married through dating sites or dating apps.
Yep.
And that's great.
Yep.
So it seems like counterintuitive at first, and I'm sure it felt counterintuitive when all these dating apps and sites were starting. So here's what he says, quote, however, new census data shows that the U.S. marriage rate hit an all-time low in 2019. For every 1,000 unmarried adults, only 33 got married. This number was 35 a decade ago in 2010 and much higher at 86 in 1970, end quote. So despite the fact that we have all of these tools at our disposal for finding people of the opposite sex, and supposedly finding people that are matched to us of the opposite sex, we're getting married at a much lower clip. So why? Quote, it's easier for men to date thanks to technological conveniences, yet this technology has created a counterintuitive situation, leading them to have a fickle attitude towards relationships, constantly searching for the next thing instead of committing to one person. With the abundance of choices on dating apps, young men are finding it difficult to build deeper connections with a single person due to that sense of constant availability. When a minor red flag appears in a relationship that is otherwise going smoothly, why stick around and work it out when thousands of other choices are right at your fingertips? Young men are making that calculation every day on dating apps and are siding with the latter. End quote. So, what's the problem with dating apps? Well, of course, there are some moral problems with them, right? If we're including, which he does in this article, things like Tinder and Bumble as dating apps, which I understand. Before you send me every comment and email about how you knew someone that met their true love on Tinder and they were both virgins and all, before you do all that, I understand that happens. But Tinder was founded with the express purpose of being a hookup app. Now, maybe it's morphed into something else, but I wasn't born last night. And I have enough friends who I know who go through Tinder as single guys to know that there aren't a lot of necessarily committed long-term relationships going on Tinder, and somewhat on Bumble and these other places too. But that's totally beside the point, because the point he's making in here is, it used to be, Andrew and I were talking about this earlier. Remember it used to be like the cliche when your buddy or your girlfriend would come to you and be like, hey, I just broke up with Bobby Joe, and now what am I going to do? Cry, 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 tear, tear, tear. And what would we say? Well, don't worry.
There's more fish
There's
in the
lots
sea.
of fish in the ocean, right? Well, here's the problem. These dating apps put all the fish in the ocean right there.
In front of you.
Like, you scrolled through 86 fish in the ocean, a third of whom made you go, maybe next, until you found this one person who you went and had a date or two or three or four with, and then realized, like, I don't know.
She drums her finger on the table the entire time we're having a date.
Right. She chews with her mouth open.
So you're like,
whatever.
That's right. There's lots of other fish in the ocean. I've seen them. I know that's the case. I'm going to go back there.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Going back to the ocean.
That's right. And by and large, men are less drawn in by the need for security in a committed relationship. So that whole thing of like, yeah, but we've been on 5 dates and they'll probably hurt her feelings, or we've been on 2 dates and, you know, maybe I'll just try and work it out.
I really want the relationship. I really want the intimacy of the relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
That need for security, remember, men by and large don't have it, or have it to a much lesser degree than our female counterparts. So by and large, men, as this reality points out, are fine going, yeah, this little thing that probably even 20 years ago my buddies would have said, dude, she's great, just chill out with the drumming of the fingers on the table thing. Now you don't even go to your buddies because you've got 86 other people sliding into your DMs on your dating app, and you don't need to try and figure it out with her. And while we might look at this and go, well, man, isn't that a positive thing? These dating apps that give tons of options to people. The backside weakness of that is they give tons of options to people.
Yeah, and it's too easy to access those options. Whereas previously, it's like, yeah, there's lots of fish in the ocean, but where am I gonna reach those people that I have things in common with, and we're gonna have some conversation to at least have the interest, know if there's interest and all that. That's all erased.
Right, and it changes. One thing he says in here that really struck me is this beginning of that sentence, quote, when a minor red flag appears in a relationship that's otherwise going smoothly, end quote. And man, I loved the way that he worded that, because part of the problem with this plethora of options is that we have redefined minor red flags and major red flags to where things that, if we're really honest, or to an people outside the relationship, they'd go, that's no big deal, right? It's not a big deal that,
She's got a couple
whatever
chin hairs.
things, right? It's a full beard. It's not a big deal. But we've made them major deals. Side note, chin hairs is kind of a major deal. That just needs to be a major. So no,
she needs to have a girlfriend that tells her she's got some chin hairs that she needs to fuck.
Right. So point is, these minor red flags have become major red flags. So why is that concerning? Well, part of the reason that's concerning is because you don't change your mindset on those things when you get married. So now you pull the trigger on marriage in one of these relationships, you get into the marriage, but you've changed your mindset on what's a major and what's a minor. And so things where you ought to just probably say nothing and move on because it's probably you being picky, or things where it would have been easy to go, hey, can we just talk about this? Probably me, but this thing's bothering me. Can we do something? We just do nothing and fester on it until it becomes this massive gaping wound. And that comes back to this redefinition of what's a minor red flag and what's a major red flag. Point is, dating apps serve for the dating community what no-fault divorce did for the marriage community. Before no-fault divorce, you had to prove a reason for your divorce, and each state had specific offenses that, if proven, would allow you to get divorced. Well, we wanted to do the no-fault divorce thing, which basically said, hey, you can get divorced because you want to get divorced. You don't have to prove any reason. And then the divorce rate skyrocketed. And I understand the divorce rate is going, ever since 1990, the divorce rate's been going down and down and down and down and down. But before we say, oh man, we've figured out divorce in this country, go look at the other side of that, right? It's going down and down and down and down, but not down and down and down and down and down as fast as the marriage rate is. So you've got less couples, number of couples, not percentage, number of couples getting divorced, but precipitously less number of people getting married. And a huge number of people living together, which of course,
right,
50 years ago, those people would have been married, so the breakups would have been included in that divorce tally. So first thing, these dating apps, which again, there's nothing sinful about a dating app. Again, depending on, I mean, if you're trying to hook up with people, that's a premarital sex issue. That's sin. The end. But being on a dating app is that in and of itself isn't, I don't believe, to be a sinful thing. But you have to recognize, particularly as a woman, the effect this is having on Gen Z men. So what's the second thing? Second thing he points to here is social media. And while he doesn't point out to specific ones, and I think it probably includes all of them, my general feeling, the way he writes this, is that he's mainly pointing the finger at TikTok, Instagram, and probably specifically like the stories and all that, little small clippets of, people doing stuff on these social medias. So here's what he says. Quote, with social media today, men can scroll through their feeds and popular pages to view more beautiful women in one sitting than most men would have seen in their lifetime 100 years ago. While women reap the benefit of the online attention, men are left wondering how the dating pool has gotten so far out of reach. Consequently, those same women who are marketing themselves, I think he left out marketing themselves with quotes, but he did. Marketing themselves as something they're not. Those same women who are marketing themselves as something they're not are left without a partner and wondering where all the good men have gone.
Isn't that like most of social media anyway? We're marketing ourselves as something that's we're not.
Right.
Anyway.
He finishes up. Through social media, both sexes are conditioned to treat themselves as a number instead of embracing true human connection and partnership, end quote. Man, that is such an indictment on social media in general, but particularly, and I know this is not a particularly popular opinion on, YouTube and the rest with the woke culture and all that stuff. But I just have to say, we need to remember that we reap what we sow, and we don't always reap it right away. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when we were doing this women power, women, you show off your bodies because if you got it, you flaunt it, and guys just have to deal with it because you're a powerful woman, and they kept you in those mom jeans and turtlenecks for far too long, and darn it, you got to show it off while you got it. And then social media started creeping up, and here's a shocker, the little girls that we were preaching that message to started doing exactly that.
Of course.
And so we've had now 40 years of quote unquote liberated women who are going on TikTok and social media and flaunting it all out there. And then two things are happening at the same time. One, those women are treating themselves as an object, something to be viewed, quite literally, and viewed specifically with sexual undertones. And then we just can't understand why guys just look at women as a sexual object. And where are all the good guys out there? Well, I'll tell you where they're not. They're not looking at your TikTok page. So if you're wondering why the DMs you're getting on TikTok to your video shaking your booty are asking you what you're doing later tonight, you shouldn't be.
Yeah, there's such a disconnect between those things. I've been watching this podcast with, I don't even know what podcast it is, but it's some conservative people and some women who are on OnlyFans, and some of the women are talking about like, yeah, I'm a traditional woman, and the conservatives are like, no, you're not. They're like, yes, I am, and these are the reasons why. And they said, the only reason I need to give you that you're not a conservative woman is you're on OnlyFans. You're not a traditional. You're not a traditional woman. And there's just such a disconnect between understanding that you're doing something that is objectifying yourself and is really tainting all the view of who you are as a person, and there's just such a disconnect between understanding this thing that you're doing with your body and how you're showing that off and all that really is disconnected from who you think you actually are, I guess.
Well, part of the problem is I feel for those girls because they've been sold a lie most of their lives. And the lie is that this is what it means to be a woman. Yeah. So when they say, oh, I'm a traditional woman.
Yeah, I think
that depends on what you think it means to be a traditional woman.
In their head, but yet they think too, well, I can show my body. I've got a good body. I should be able to show it off, because to them, it's like, it's just so disconnected.
That's right. But that's also what they've been told, is that what it means to be a woman. Remember not that long ago when women were wearing vaginas on their hats on their heads, running around Washington, D.C. And to literally everyone except those women in Washington, D.C., we thought they were like a punchline to a bad joke. Like, no one was taking women's rights seriously when you're wearing vagina hats on your head. But they did.
Well, it just doesn't connect. There's no connection.
Right, yes. But their thing is, hey, being a woman is just, it's just a thing. And women don't need to be treated differently than any other people. But the problem is, when we do that, and the way we do that is, well, guys just wear whatever they want, so women can just wear whatever they want, and I should just be able to show my body off however I want because I'm a woman, and a guy can't tell me what to wear.
On who I am.
But that's right. But the problem is, I feel like these young women have bought into this, and so what they're doing again is they're setting this foundation of this is what womanhood looks like to their male counterparts. And so I really thought, what a clever way of saying that. And I think he's probably right that when he writes, quote, with social media today, men can scroll through their feeds and popular pages to view more beautiful women in one sitting than most men would see in their lifetime 100 years ago.
Right.
I mean, that's got to be true, because I know the little bit of time I spend on social media, you can see on like those stories people from all over. I don't even know how I'm getting any of that stuff. It's not like they're friends of mine on any of these sites. They're just, the algorithms are working.
Sure.
And for some odd reason, babe, you're never going to believe this. The algorithms on the social medias where I've identified myself as a man, they're not sending me a lot of male stories on those pages. It's crazy. You would think, I don't know. Maybe it's a fidelity. I need to tell them I'm into men. Yeah, that's what it is. Nothing. Maybe it's that it's the marriage by design sites, and so they think that we're looking for marriage material on our social medias.
I'm sure that's exactly it.
So here's what we've got so far, 2/3 the way through. We've got dating apps that make it clear to men there's tons of options here. We've got social media that is women acting like an everyday woman, but really putting forward a caricature of what it means to be a woman. And then the third piece of this, which is really an extension of the social media, particularly the TikTok kind of short video piece. Traditionally, and I'm not using that in the way that OnlyFans girls do. I mean, really traditionally, there was a motivation for men to take relationships seriously. And here's how it worked. As guys, we're created, and it's just impossible to argue this point at this point. There's too much science involved. Men are more visually stimulated than women. So guys see something they want, and then they're motivated to pursue it. So with the rare exceptions of like the John Nash, mathematics story, other than that, guys see a girl, they're physically attracted to her, and then they pursue the relationship. They continue to pursue the relationship, and while emotions start getting involved and you start growing in intimacy emotionally, there is an underlying motivator for guys. And here's what it is: sex. And look, you can get after me for saying, well, guys aren't only motivated by sex. And I just very clearly said that a second ago. It's not the only motivation, but it is a huge motivation. And I know that it's always been this way because even Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 7 that we're going to be talking about here in the next few weeks. When he talks to people about being single, he tells them the preference would be to be single in service to the Lord.
Because you have more time to serve the Lord, right?
Right. And he doesn't say, but, if you really like hanging around with someone, but if you really have a good dinner spot that you guys like going to, but if you've talked about having 4 kids and a nice house on a hill, he says, but it would be better for you to marry than to burn in lust. Mm-hmm. So he even identifies, what the real problem to the single life is? Not having any sex. And that's the thing that makes it really difficult. Jesus talks about this to his disciples too, the end of Matthew 19. After he gets done talking to the Pharisees, the disciples go, then wouldn't it be better for man to not marry? And Jesus says, yes, but that's a hard truth for a lot of people to accept. And so it would be better for them to marry unless they're called to that single life. Well, one of the biggest things that will uncall you to that single life is the desire for sexual intimacy as a man. So this is why the traditional relationship was, hey, if you're a girlfriend, don't give away the milk before they buy the cow or something like that.
I think that's the way to say it.
Because once you give up sexually what he wants, you've demotivated him to marry you. And again, that's traditional. But my point is that's a thing. Well, here's the third thing that he identifies. Here's what he says. Quote, "There's no doubt that lust, which is carnal in nature, is the strongest driving motivation for men when it comes to dating." End quote. I would just parenthetically say, I think that term lust is a little inflammatory. But I would say that there's no doubt that physical attraction, which is carnal in nature, is the strongest driving motivation for men when it comes to dating. Quote, "It sparks initial attraction and passion and draws people together. Ultimately, though, lust may fade, but the emotional connection typically built upon that initial sense of attraction is what can determine a relationship's success. Pornography, however, completely destroys this dynamic because it shifts men's reward system to simply being carnal and physical in nature, but lacking the emotional connection necessary for healthy relationships. Today, pornography is easier than ever to consume. 40 million U.S. adults regularly visit pornography websites, and 10% of U.S. adults admit to having an addiction to internet pornography." So what he's saying here, and I don't want to miss this because it's important, pornography, not only is it a sin in and of itself and a perversion of what God intended sex to be, but for single men, it fills a desire that is a motivation for them to take dating relationships seriously, which is finding someone and convincing them to spend the rest of their life with you so that you can have sex with them, right? Instead, at the click of a button, can find really any kind of sex I can imagine.
With any type of girl that you find attractive.
With any type of girl or girls or donkeys that I find attractive. And then an added benefit, and I know this is going to blow some girls' minds, but an added benefit for guys is that there isn't any human connection involved. Mm-hmm. Because for guys, so often the human connection piece of sex is a cost-benefit analysis for the guy. Like, hey, really want to have sex with this girl, but do I want the baggage that comes with that? Meaning she's going to want a relationship and she's going to want to like call me the next day and all this thing. And I'm overstating that a little bit, but you guys understand, I think, the point of what I'm saying. Like traditionally, when you chose to go down the road of sex, there was commitment involved in that, either because you've been married or because sex is involved in relationships. Well, the problem is we've went away from that a long time ago as a society, of the expectation that there's committed relationship before sex. I just heard maybe a year, maybe two ago, that it used to be secular wise. Traditionally, it was after the fourth or fifth date that women would say, okay, now I'm comfortable having sex. Then it was like the second date. The statistic a couple of years ago was like 40% of women said it's acceptable to have sex before the first date.
Yeah.
Like, we might as well. And the quotes were like, well, I just want to get this out of the way so that he's not thinking about it while we're trying to get to know each other.
Or I think one of them was, I just want to know if we're compatible before you even go down the road of dating.
Right. Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I would love to know how many guys got to the night of the first date and were a no-call, no-show because, I mean, I've sort of accomplished everything here I wanted to accomplish, and they're moving on. But point is, pornography removes that ongoing relationship thing and just makes it about me getting mine.
Right. And that's an important thing is with the pornography, you don't have to give any of yourself.
Nothing.
It's all self-gratifying. It's all about me.
Yep.
There's no self-sacrificing, no having to think of the other person, none of that. It's the complete opposite.
Yep.
And really, it kind of ties in with the first point too. There's lots of these porn experiences in the ocean.
Yep.
If I don't like this one, I'm just going to click on the next one.
That's exactly right.
Just like with the first point he made, if I don't like this one, I can just dump that real quick and find the next one.
That's
Find
right.
the next one to go to.
That's
so
right.
why really invest in dating or a relationship, which might lead to marriage?
Right. So practically, and I really thought this article was great. And there's some scary stuff in here. 67% of 13-year-old boys have seen at least one pornographic image on some sort of digital device in the past year. And by the age of 18, that number rises to 90%. In porn, finding a relationship is effortless. With porn, this digital partner has nothing else to do but wait for you, please you, and give you exactly what you think you want.
Right.
If this partner ever fails to keep you entertained, they can be exchanged with a single click. Why waste your time dating, flirting, and putting in effort when men can have their deepest sexual desires met online? And if your answer to this, and Andrea and I talked about this, if your answer to this is, well, but it's like not a real person.
Yeah, because I had said that. Yeah, but wouldn't it be unsatisfying that it's not a real physical thing that's happening? I mean, with an actual person, the experience isn't real. And Nathan's like,
No, it's just not. I mean, statistically, it's not.
Right.
And even sex in general testifies to that, because if we're honest, in most sexual relationships, who is it that's saying they're not satisfied with the type of sex that they're having?
yeah, more largely women.
Right, because guys are sort of wham bam, thank you ma'am. Our bodies are made more that way. And it takes real discipline and sacrifice for men to be students of their spouse, learn their bodies, and please their wives sexually. In these types of relationships where you're just making it about sex, you're not interested in doing that anyway. And so you're just in there to have the sex and move on. The problem is when you do that with a real live human being body, it has a real live human being emotion and mind and all the rest. And you have to deal with that as a guy. And you might think I have a really poor view of men, to which I would tell you, yes, I do. Men in their carnal state, because I see the statistics of what are coming out, and I expect better of men, but I also think women need to stop trying to manipulate men into being what they want them to be and start understanding that men are created a certain way. You got to deal with it.
Well, I'm just processing it as you're talking. Women know men are created. I mean, maybe not fully consciously know, but when we drop to the lowest common denominator of the attention that I'm going to get is sexual, because I know that that's really what you're ultimately driven by. That's how I'm going to get your attention. I'm going to use my body to do that.
Yep.
And so we feed into this whole thing.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Yeah, it's why I've been talking about this in other applications this week, but it's one of the things that I love the most about you is how seriously you take modesty in the way that you present your own body. Because I love your body. But one thing I love about how you handle yourself is that all of you watching our podcast, there's like most of Andrea's body that you're never going to see. It's just for me. Like I get to see that. And it really puffs me up as a guy because I have this special thing that you're never going to get to witness. And it's just between Andrea and I. And it really honors me and really, I guess, energizes me that that's a thing, and you recognize that's a thing, and you take that seriously. So thank you for doing that. But I recognize that's not societally. That's not the way a lot of people think they want to live their lives, and that makes me sad. And you're right; it plays right into the hand of these lesser guys. So he ends this article. I'll read this and then we'll put our closing thoughts in. Quote, simply put, the breakdown of relationships between men and women is startling and is detrimental to healthy society. The good news is that men can fix this, and the remedy is easier than we think. Leave dating apps, stop watching porn and go talk to girls in real life, which I thought was pretty funny.
Great.
And also just good in general. Like,
Yeah.
find some
we need to learn how to
communities. And
develop
I know this is
relationship.
difficult in modern society, but find those places where you can meet people of the opposite sex live. And not this thing they hold out on any
Right.
of these apps or social
Yeah,
media.
learn how to develop friendships, dating relationships. Yeah. Just relationships in general.
Right. Well, thank you, Aldo, for putting this article together. I was impressed with it, and I appreciate his reporting. I hope if you're thinking about this from a marriage champion standpoint, I would just encourage you when you're meeting with young couples, or you're meeting with a young man, if you're discipling a young man, flat ask him about the porn problem. I mean, just flat ask him. And ask him when he's not expecting it, right? I'd recommend, like, if you meet for a meal and you pray before the meal, the moment you say amen, just look up and say, this is exactly how I want you to say it. When's the last time you looked at porn?
Yeah, somebody just recently we're having a discussion with a group of people at our church, and we're saying, hey, we need to be serious about talking to other couples about, or our friends about porn. And this other couple chimed in and said the best thing to do is aren't they the ones who said it?
Yeah,
catch
that's
them
great.
off guard.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they said specifically, don't say, have you been looking at porn?
Yes.
Say,
Oh, that's
when's
right.
the last
Yes.
time you looked at porn?
Yeah, specifically, when's the last time you looked at porn? Because that's really more of a measurable thing.
Right. And if you ask at a time they're not expecting it, the look on their face will answer as much as their words do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. Then also just talk to them about how they look at relationships. Right. If they're on dating apps, what time they spend on social media and how these things impact the way they look at relationships.
That's great. So just real quick, I was listening to something last night, and the average time that somebody spends on social media a day, guess?
Oh, gross. An hour.
2.5 hours.
Ew.
But yet we don't find time to connect with our spouses. Something doesn't add up there.
Right.
You know?
Good call.
So, or we don't find time to pursue relationship or whatever that is,
Wow. Well,
Anyway.
give me 5 for bringing that average down, you and me. Nice. All right, guys, love to have your thoughts on this. What do you think about this article that he wrote? I'll link to the article in the description below. Love to have you check that out, guys. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry we went a little long today, but appreciate you sticking with us. Until next time, remember, God is for your marriage. Have a great week.